Alright, what's going on, everybody? Sam Buckley, Smoky Bones, or just Bones on CB. I'm doing a little video today. This is just to let y'all know what I'm doing. I'm about to do a little video here shortly, CB related. I know, like, I don't know, forever ago, when I first joined the STA, I promised you guys a installation tech video for how to install CB, how to install and SWR tune a CB in a Cascadia. Unfortunately, in my infinite wisdom, making that video, I did a horrible job of ensuring that I had good audio, so the video had to be scrapped, which sucks because I thought it was pretty highly informative for those who have never had to install a radio in a truck before. It seems like it's fairly straightforward, but when you look at some people who run around out here, the way they've got their radios installed, wires just everywhere, and then always complaining about how they never get out, they have horrible reception, this, that, and the other, because they don't know what tuning SWR is. There was useful information in there. I could probably pretty much run down how to install it in a flat top Cascadia just by telling you about it instead of having to show you. But me personally, I'm a visual learner. You can tell me something all day long, I'm not going to know exactly what you're talking about until I see it for myself. So I don't have a Cascadia anymore. I haven't had a Cascadia in a long time, which shows how long the last time I did a video was. It's been a minute. But I am in something that is a little bit more difficult to run wire in and install aftermarket things in without having to punch holes. And that is one big stipulation, is I cannot put any holes in this truck. They specifically said do not drill any holes for mounting CB radio, CB accessories, external speakers, because the truck already has one, this, that, and the other. It's a 2012 Kenworth T660 62-inch flat top aero cab, 240-inch wheelbase, rides like a Cadillac. But the difference is, if you let me swap the camera real quick. If it will let me, it will not. Compared to a ProStar, a Cascadia, pretty much any Volvo, let's see, what are some other, your Kenworth T680s, some of the Peterbilts that have the big wide cab with the doors that close like a car, 660s, W900s, T800s. I think there's probably one or two other Kenworth models that have the old school narrow cab. I mean, if you kind of look, you can see the cab is a little bit narrower, and it has these doors that, instead of closing, sealing to the frame on the side, the door actually sets in. See? See how the door sets into this jam instead of sealing with a gasket right here. The gasket is inside. So it makes it more difficult to run wire through the door and everything like that without crushing it. And the mirror mounts, or the antenna mounts, are on the mirror post with factory run coax that goes through the top post. Then what next problem you have to contend with is the location of the factory CB mount. It's in a drop box tray that sits above the dash. And that tray, you pop it out. If you have a 660, you know what I'm talking about. A 660, a W900, 680. It comes down and out like an equipment tray in some of these newer fire trucks nowadays. The tray, it slides towards you and then drops down as it gets toward the end. Well, the issue with that is what I was going to do to eliminate that problem of not being able to drill holes. I was just going to go buy another tray. Shell. Just the shell, not the guts with the pre-run wire post and the mounting block in there and everything. I was going to get just the shell. That way I could punch 4 holes up in the bottom of that one and make a custom bracket for my CB and my amp. Until I found out how much they cost, because I called the Kenworth dealership and they said that those trays, just for that little plastic CB tray, is $597. Good God Almighty. No wonder these trucks cost so much money. We're getting robbed. I still kind of plan on going over to a salvage lot or something like that, or calling a couple of salvage lots and see if they might have one in a wrecked truck that at least the box is still in good shape. But for now, I'm just going to have to improvise. Let me show you something. This is a bilinear CB amp. It's a 200 watt amp. Ike, I'm sorry. I know you're a huge ham radio fan, and I know you ham radio guys hate when CBers run amps on CB frequencies and start walking all over your ham bands. I'm sorry, but I'll tell you what, when I quit hearing ham radios on the CB band, I will probably get rid of that amp, which is probably never going to happen. No offense, it's just a joke. That's not going to fit up in that box because the radio already barely fits. I had to take... That radio is a Galaxy 959. It's a 2013 or 2012. I'm not sure exactly what year it was produced. I bought it in 2013. So it's about 3 years old. And the microphone connection is on the left side of it as you're facing the control plate. Well, it's so big, or rather that CB tray is so small, that I had to get this little guy right here. This wire that runs up in there is connected to a 90-degree elbow just to where I could have my mic hooked up with that radio up in that box. Plus, there's ribs inside that box. I had to get a file and file a hole for the, or file a notch for the mic wire to sit inside. That way it didn't get cut from bouncing around in there. And it's still, it's like trying to fit a 9-pound baby in a 2-pound bag. Just putting that radio up in there the way it sits. Plus, it's got the pre-run coax, garbage. It's got a pre-run external speaker, awesome, and it's got pre-run wire, which is fine for a regular CB that's just like peaked and tuned like that one is. And it's only pushing out 30 watts, 29 to 30. I just had it bench tested yesterday because I thought it was getting screwy on me. It will not handle that factory power wire that's in there. Is like thinner than shoestring. It will not handle a radio plus a 200 watt linear amp. Now, I did have the radio bench tested with the amp in line, and the most we got out of it was about 160 watts. That's just because there's a little bit more tuning that can be done to the radio without having to remove and replace internal radio parts that can get me closer to that 200 watt maximum push that this amp is capable of. But I mean 150 is fine for me right now. I'm sure maybe in a couple of months or a couple of years I might want to drive it a little harder, but it's fine for me right now. All I care about is getting out down the road, and you know, when those idiots that want to sit there and hit the Roger beep button 21 times in a row just to piss drivers off, freaking hold the mic down, you don't hear them. Or backdrive their radio, because they're freaking assholes and deserve it. Anyways, so that is what I'm working with. That amp has to find a home somewhere in this truck, and I'm going to run it straight to the battery. It is not so big that it needs to run straight to the battery, but in my opinion, it is probably the safest and simplest route to go, because running it straight to the battery does not require any, well, I say that now, knock on wood, splicing or soldering, so long as I can find a route through the dash, firewall, down to the frame to run that wire. So I'm gonna do a video on the install, and I'll be talking about some radio stuff. One other thing, a couple other things I want to talk about in this video as far as CB goes, and I'll do that in this video, and then the install will be strictly the install instead of me going on about a million different things like I'm about to do. Whether you're running a tuned radio, a boosted radio with an amp, a high power 300 watt radio that's tuned to work on a 10 or 11 meter band, such as a Galaxy 98 VHP, or one of the high powered Connexes or Rangers or Strikers, or whatever. It doesn't matter what kind of radio you have. It doesn't matter what kind of anything. I have only been driving since March, and already I've probably helped 5 people tune their antennas. There is no such thing. There is no such thing. There is no such thing, comma, pause for emphasis, as a plug and play antenna radio setup. I'm sorry, it does not exist. It never will exist. I don't care what you do. I don't care what anybody tries to tell you. I don't care that Galaxy says that they have a built-in SWR meter in their in their reasonably, oh god, expensive radios. That SWR meter does not worth a crap. If you hook a radio up and just run some random length of wire to a random antenna and mount it in some random place on the truck, it is not going to work worth a crap. You'll be lucky to talk to the guy sitting next to you. You have to run a certain length of coax cable, and you absolutely must purchase at least a single gauge PLC or PDC-1 or some other similar $20 or $30 SWR meter and tune the length of your antenna. I promise you, I mean, you can think you're the best genius in the world. If you don't do that, at least, you probably won't be able to talk across the parking lot at a truck stop. Everything in CB is either based on wavelength or most of the simple stuff on a truck driver's level who just knows enough to install is based on wavelength. Wavelength is a very important feature. Wavelength is 9 feet. So everything that you do, you want to do in increments of 3, 6, 9, or 18. And we give you a clue or a little example. When you go to a CB shop and you buy a steel whip antenna, the most popular size is 9 feet for a full-size steel whip. The best size that you can get, especially if you're running on like a pickup truck or something like that, You ever been driving around and see a pickup truck with a big old 9-foot long steel whip antenna? That's because it's 9 feet, because of wavelength is 9 feet. When you buy coax, they will tell you either get it in 12 or 18 foot sections. Well, those are multiples of, you guessed it, 9 and 3. When you get a amp or a SWR and power meter, you have to run a jumper wire. Your jumper wire is typically going to give you the best performance if you have it somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 feet, because you don't want 18 feet of coax going from your radio to your SWR meter plus another 18 foot from the meter to the antenna. Most CB shops will tell you that a 5-foot antenna is your best bet because it's closer to 4.5 than 6 feet is, and 4.5 is half of 9. Wavelength. Now, some of you more experienced guys out there watching this might go, wow, you're an idiot, you have no idea what you're talking about. I do not know a great deal about CB. I do know what I've told, and I do know what has worked for me, and what I've read from certain publications and things like that are actually, you know, not just some guy on Trucker's Report or some BS like that. Probably what it is I'm just not very good at explaining it in a way that the older guys who use a lot of the high-tech terminology understand it. I'm trying to explain this stuff in a way that the basic guy like me would understand it. But wavelength is a very important factor when it comes to the size and length of your wire in your antenna. Power wire and all that crap doesn't matter. Your SWR, your transmit and receive wiring, your coax radio wire, and your antenna, the standard wavelength of 9 feet is a, you know, for all purposes, a base number to base your decisions off for what lengths of equipment you need to get. So keep that in mind. What the heck else do I have? I think, if you are not patient when you go to get an antenna, if you get a fiberglass whip, which are very good, especially the fire stick ones, they're like $30 for a 5-footer, and they handle up to 4,000 or 5,000 watts, more than you'll need, and they transmit very well and receive very well. Get one with what's called a tunable tip. When you take the little rubber cap off the top, it's got what looks like a screw on the top and a jam nut. Get that. Just get it. Unless you're an old school guy and you know how to tune a old school fiberglass top loaded antenna, get a tunable tip. If they don't have one where you're at, wait until you go somewhere that does. And if you want to learn how to length tune a old style fiberglass whip, find some old busted ones first, and find somebody that knows how to do it to show you how to do it, because I don't even know how to do it properly. I tried with factory radio antennas once because I was bored and I just wanted to try it. You know, horrible. The antennas were destroyed. And what I mean is, by an old school antenna, an old school fiberglass whip that has the copper wound up real tight at the top, which is called a top loaded antenna. When you take the little rubber cap off the very tip of the antenna, you'll see the fiberglass runs out and it stops, and there's a little piece of that copper wire that's either exposed or it's just barely covered by the rubber sleeve, the casing that goes around the antenna. The way those antennas are tuned is you have to cut that sleeve open to get that little piece of copper that's wound up in there. and you have to basically unwind that copper, and you have to either stretch it out or cut it, shortening it up to tune your antenna. That was the only real downside to the old school fiberglass top load antennas, is they were a bitch, excuse my language, to tune, and they took a lot of time to tune, and if you messed one up when you were tuning it, the antenna was ruined usually. Now you've got these tunable tip ones. They tune just exactly the same, but they're 1,000 million times faster. But, you know, from what I've talked to a couple of guys that have been doing this for a day or two, they said that, you know, that after they knew how to tune a fiberglass antenna, they'll never get one of these because, well, most of them, just because it's a skill, it's an art, and it's something that not a lot of people enjoy doing. People take pride in being able to do that stuff. Just like guys that polish these damn aluminum on his trucks take pride because I've tried it and it's some work and it takes some skill, and I'm learning. But anyways, that's a totally different subject. Yeah. Tune your shit. Spend the extra. If you're going to spend, and this is what gets me. And guys will go out there and buy a $250, $350, $450, $500 radio with $100 big old aluminum Monkey Made or Predator 10K or 20K antenna, and then you'll buy like some cheap 75% shield coax, and then that's like a 200, 300 watt radio, and you think you're gonna power it right off of the factory pre-run CB power. Nah. First off, you're going to the battery, or you're not gonna have a running radio, or you're not, probably in some situations, if you don't wire it to the battery, you're not gonna have a truck that looks like it didn't catch on fire either. The other thing is that cheap 75% shielding coax, you're probably gonna melt the inside of it, and if you don't, that cheap shielding, you're just gonna get nothing but interference all day long. Plus, you're gonna bleed a whole bunch of your power out of the wire before it even makes it to the antenna with that big powered radio, right? Well, then it's like, well, I got this 300, you get it all set up and everything like that. Let's say that you wire it to the battery and you get some good 95% shield coax. You pay extra money for it because it's worth it, I promise you. Don't ever buy a 75% shield coax. Ever. It's a waste of money. You'll get about half the power that your radio would put out if you had 95% shield. You're only going to get about half of that power to your antenna with 75% shield. It just does not hold the power in. It bleeds through. It's not insulated well enough, and it allows too much static to come through. 95% shield coax only, 18-foot section, or 12 I think is acceptable as well, if I remember correctly. Somebody please comment and correct me on that if you're a CB expert, if 12 feet is acceptable. I have 18. 18 works great for me. 18 feet of 95% shield coax soldered on each end. Most of your shops will solder the ends on for you. And then my setup is a fiberglass whip. Anyways, let's say you got that Predator 200 or 10,000 watt or a Monkey Made 20,000 watt aluminum coil antenna, whatever, and you got some good wire, and you ran your power wire to the battery with some thick ass 8, 6 or 4 gauge wire, which is more than acceptable for that. That's probably what you want to use, right? Well, then you got it all set up and you're sitting there talking, and you lose service with freaking Johnny Walker a half a mile down the highway, and you're like, what the heck, I got this super powerful radio and I can't even make it a half a mile down the road. Well, it ain't never had an SWR meter on it. Imagine that. You keep doing that and you're gonna end up with a $500 paperweight. It is very, very, very important. A lot of people think that, how does a radio just destroy itself by using it, just hooking it up without tuning it? Well, because it's made to work if it's tuned a certain way. If it's not tuned a certain way, the radio internal parts are not operating the way that they need to be, and some of them are backing up, they're overheating, they're not able to push out the power that the equipment is trying to shove out the wire and out the top of the radio. Sounds weird. Yes, it's just electrical signal, but it still works the same to some of those electrical components in that radio that are very sensitive. You have got to tune tune your antenna. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a very broken, very expensive, nice dash object. That's all it's going to be at that point. It's not going to work. Well, man, why am I going to go spend $20 or $30 on a meter? I just spent $500 on this radio. It's got a meter built into it. Yeah, it is. It's built into it as a selling feature. It is not built in to work as precisely as even an static PDC-1 that you can buy off the shelf at the Pilot for $20. And that's all you need. I have the PDC-2, which you can also read power output with that as well. But I mainly use it for SWR, and that's the important part, is getting your SWR tuned. If you can afford to go buy a $500 radio, $30 worth of coax, a $100 antenna, oh man, plus all the wiring stuff, you know, you're up in $700-800 now on a setup. You can afford to go buy a $20 meter to install it and set it up and operate it properly. If you can't, then you have some serious spending issues, and you should probably go see somebody about that. So more to follow.